Hi, I'm Elli Fischer, a writer, translator, editor, historian. This is 18 questions for 40 Israeli thinkers for 1840.
So we'll begin where we always do. As an Israeli and as a Jew, how are you feeling at this moment in Israeli history?
Okay, first of all, I don't do the whole as a thing. It's like sort of like
Well, you are an Israeli and you are a Jew.
I am an
so-
Israeli and I am a Jew.
And if you weren't, then your perspective wouldn't be as noteworthy.
I don't know. I try not to, in general, I try not to inject identity. We'll probably get into this later. I try not to inject those sort of identitarian
Markers or labels?
into like I don't think that I speak with any more authority just because I know something that somebody else doesn't, or maybe because I've experienced something that somebody else
we
hasn't.
hold you in high regard. It's not the authority with why we
Right.
preface. It's
Okay.
that they probably those points of your identity probably inform your experience of the question.
Okay, and that should come out.
So we'll put a disclaimer that no one should think
fine.
that you
You
have
can
any
say it about
particular-
me as a, but like that should come out in whatever I answer. If it makes sense to you, and if it's something that if I can speak from reason or from knowledge or from experience, then I'll do so.
We'll keep this disclaimer in. I think it's
Yeah, I like the disclaimer, and it's sort of like it's part of the brand.
perfect.
Right. I don't do the whole as a rabbi, as a Jew, as a whatever.
As an Elli Fischer.
Yeah, not even that.
All right, so then how are you feeling at this moment in Israeli history?
A lot of mixed feelings.
Mixed feelings in what sense?
A lot of mixed feelings. Let's start with the positive. The really positive is I've spent a lot of time over the last year and a half talking to kids and seeing kids in action. They have taken the weight of this whole country on their shoulders, and they've done amazing things. Now, I'm not going to say that like they're suffering for it, right? And they're going through a lot of trauma. But I've been just absolutely blown away by the way that these kids have carried themselves, and it just gives me a lot of optimism about the future of this country, that this is our future, and we're in good hands.
When you say kids, you mean
The kids that are fighting, the soldiers.
oh, okay, fine, like
Yeah.
young adults.
Yes.
No, meaning at first I thought you were no.
Right. I mean, like,
At
people your age, yes.
Yeah, no.
Yes,
at first,
yes.
at first I thought you were talking about like school
little
children.
kids.
And then,
No,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No.
I mean the soldiers.
That wasn't a Mel Barinholtz edit, if you're familiar. But.
Nope.
Okay, great. Some of the 1840 listeners will know.
Okay. But yeah, so that's the optimism, that the kids are amazing. The young adults, the 18 to probably 25, 30. I mean, if you reserve duty also, they've really stepped up, and they've inspired a lot of confidence. I've had like real conversations with some of these kids who have really seen a heck of a lot. People who have done things that, it's weird to like talk to a kid who's in your shul and, child of friends of yours who has taken lives, right? It's a strange thing to do, right? And we don't think about it. You don't expect to encounter people like that in your shul, in your community. And here, I actually, wanted to talk to the kid about one particular thing, and I knew what he did in the army, and like we sat down over.
Which thing, if I might ask?
I was worried about this point. I was worried because you saw on Twitter and on social media, and sometimes in the mainstream media, things about the Israeli soldiers who were misbehaving, right? Davening in the loudspeaker, the muezzin, like in a mosque or something like that, or trying on the whole wardrobe when they took over a house somewhere. And I've wanted to know, like, okay, like how are these kids, how are these soldiers really I call them kids. I'm sorry.
No.
It's,
It's a point of clarity, not a correction.
they're adults. They're all, they're grown-ups. Um, I wanted to sort of get more of an understanding of what they're going through and whether or not these things are the norm, and whether or not does the average soldier, is there a point at which they'll say, like, I can't follow that order? Those are the kinds of questions that I wanted to ask him. And and he told me some of the things that he had experienced, and he said this. He mentioned that he's responsible for the deaths of enemies in wartime. But it's still, I can't imagine, we talk about, oh yeah, it's, enemies, and we justify it, and it's justified, but like, I still can't imagine taking the life of another human being, even as much as that other person is trying to kill me, as much as that other person might deserve it. It's not something that I can imagine. I never served. I was never a soldier. I was never a combat soldier. So yeah, I think that the kids, with all they're going through, are amazing. The pessimism, I'll tell you, my biggest fear is that, let's say, this is going to get a little bit theological. The way, my understanding, and I think that this is really pshat, is that there are two different covenants. Eretz Yisrael was promised to Bnei Yisrael through two different covenants. One is the Brit Avot, the Bris Avos, if you will. It's the Bris Ben Abisarim, the covenant between the parts. It's unilateral. Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Avraham, you're going to suffer, you're going to be enslaved 400 years. At the end, you're going to come back. I'm going to bring you back. That requires nothing on our part. It's also cyclical, right? That's what we're talking about in V'hisha Amda, the Seder, right? Shelo echad bilvad, chol dar vadar, right? And it also comes up in other contexts as well, like in Parshat Bechukosai, which we're going to read next week. Right? V'zacharti lahem bris rishonim, v'zacharti as bris Avraham, v'havas bris Yitzchak, v'havas bris Yaakov ezkar. That's what it's talking about, and that's where it says v'af v'af kol zos biyosam be'eretz vehem lo ma'astim lo ga'altim lo chalosam lo hafer bris yitam.
I'll take your word for it.
That's that promise. And the Gemara talks about it. I was like, oh, this is Lo Ma'astim, that's the gullus of Bavel. And Lo Ga'altim, that's the gullus of Paras. And this one's Yavan. And this one, meaning it's over and over again, right? It means that this bris, this covenant is, you're going to suffer, but at the end of the suffering, at the end of the exile, you're going to come back. And then there's the bilateral covenant, which is the Torah itself, meaning that's the covenant of Torah and mitzvos, and that's, we get to stay in the land as long as we're upholding the Torah and doing the mitzvos, and if not, we just read, the land will spit us out. And so clearly there's some kind of grace period, right? You get it unilaterally, it's a promise, it's a fulfillment of a promise. So that's where we are. I think that's where we are today, right? This is the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel. I view it as a fulfillment of that promise. I think that's why we eat barbecue on Yom HaAtzmaut, right? Because like the barbecuing is like a zecher for the Bris Ben Abisarim, right? Like we're eating pieces of meat, chopped up pieces of meat. But how long is that grace period going to last? And are we living up to it? Are we, do we, at what
It's
point
like a
do we?
fear about, will we have Israel forever, essentially?
Yeah, that's right. I don't understand the confidence of people who say that, like, oh, we were promised that this time we're never going to lose it again. Like, I don't know. I read Chumash. Maybe there is some kind of promise. Maybe there is some kind of. Right? I just don't know how you could be so confident in it. Right? Mm-hmm. One says there's a promise. One says there's not a promise. There are a lot of people that have tried to figure out God's playbook and what things are going to look like at the end of days. I cannot for the life of me understand how anybody has that kind of confidence to say it really doesn't matter because we can't give it up. We can't lose it. There's no way we could lose it.
What would you say has been Israel's greatest success and greatest mistake in the war against Hamas?
The greatest success in the larger war has been sort of like the breakup of the Iranian axis. Right? Syria's fallen. Hezbollah has been completely neutralized. Iran has lost a lot of their capabilities. And so the threat of Hamas's replenishment, Hamas is no longer a part of a broader axis of terror in the region, right? You still have the Houthim, who are sort of like they're like my daughter calls them, the friend who's like thinks they're part of the friend group but isn't really part of the friend group. Yeah, they're like the sort of like, okay, fine, like like the sympathy.
Like they want to participate in it.
Like the sympathy member of the the sympathy member of the group. I don't know, Peter Pettigrew if you're a Harry Potter fan, right? And this obviously she thought of this while we were sitting in our mamad in our reinforced room, probably at 4:00 in the morning after one of the sirens. She's like, you know what the Houthim are like. So I think that's probably the greatest success. I think the greatest failure has just been the complete lack of transparency about what we're trying to accomplish and how we're trying to accomplish it. To this day, we don't know what, and I don't know. And the truth of the matter is, it's not my job to know, but the sense that I get is that it's, there are opportunities here. There have been opportunities here to get other things done, to get a broader deal, and that there hasn't been any sort of effort. There hasn't really been an effort to either define an objective and then a concrete objective and then do that, or to define a diplomatic horizon and try to achieve that. It's just stringing it along, going along, and we're getting tired, and that's really not where you want to be.
How have your religious views changed since October 7th?
What do you mean by religious views?
You tell me. However you want to qualify it.
I suppose that my religious views I don't know if this is really a change because I kind of felt this way beforehand. The Hezdar program, and just say it like this. I'm not a believer in Hezdar. Hezdar is the combination of military service with studies in yeshiva. I believe in Hezdar not because I think that it's the most wonderful. Like I don't romanticize military service. I don't think we should be romanticizing military service. I think that military service is a necessity. It's a civic duty. It's a national duty. It's, it's a mitzvah, right? But I think that the way that the Hezdar soldiers in particular have sort of carried themselves and handled themselves in this war, and how they've suffered. Like I don't know if you've been following the boys from Yerucham, the 8 boys from Yerucham that were killed, and then there were 6 from Yeshivat Har Etzion, and every single story, every single one of these is just an absolute gem. Absolutely just wonderful, wonderful young man. And it's really painful, but it really has reinforced that, like, this is the cream of the crop. This is what everybody should be aspiring to. And I've lost a lot of, I don't know if this is a religious change, but I feel a lot more disappointment, frustration, exasperation, anger towards the segments of Israeli society that don't serve in the army than I did beforehand.
Well, we're going to get to talking about the army a little bit soon. Okay. I want to take a little bit of a turn to talk more about just Israeli society in general and your relation to it. And
Okay.
We'll start with, when you're deciding which Knesset party to vote for, what do you look for in deciding which Knesset party to vote for?
Whichever one makes me least nauseous. It's like, I think that's it. No, there are certain issues, meaning I generally want to vote for a party that at least has a good chance of being in the governing coalition. I want to vote for a party that is, on the basic level, representative of, of my views, of my political views. And I gotta say, I think part of it has to be like I'm voting with my, with my wallet, right? Meaning I send my kids to certain kinds of institutions. I live in a certain kind of community in a certain kind of city, and I want to vote for the party that's going to bring those issues to the fore. Meaning that it's going to get money for those institutions. It's going to build roads in my city or whatever. And those are just, I think just basic self-interest, I think, is ultimately the main thing. And obviously there's a broader national, there's something national that we want to look at. I try to steer clear of the identity politics, and there's a lot of identity politics here. Identity politics is, I'm Dati Leumi, so I vote for the Dati Leumi party. I'm Karedi, so I vote for the Karedi party. I'm Arab, so I vote for the Arab party, right? Regardless of what they stand for, regardless of what their platform is. I also try to stay away from cults of personality, and there are a number of those. Some of them have sort of graduated. I think that Yesh Atid, when they first started, they were much more of a cult of personality. And I think that now they've stabilized somewhat. And they're not as much of a cult of personality, but there are other parties that are cults of personality, so I steer clear of those. So yeah, that's the basic. Yeah.
Which is more important for Israel, Judaism or democracy?
Oh, Judaism.
You say more?
The world has a lot of democracies. The world doesn't have a lot of Jewish states. Now, I don't know what it means to be the question of a Jewish state is also, it's a complicated question. I don't think a state can, in any meaningful way, be what makes a state Jewish, right? What makes a state Jewish is, okay, the language is Hebrew, and its calendar is, right, its day of rest is Shabbat, and its calendar is the Jewish calendar, right? Everybody gets off and all the stores are closed on our holidays, right? Which sometimes could be annoying because it's like, there's no great adventure on Chol HaMoed where we have the run of the place. You know what I'm saying? Because like here, the way that I would put it is, and it's something that we're still learning how to do this. Here in Israel, we're the goyim. Okay? This is what I mean by that is like we're the majority. The entire rhythm and routine of the country is it's our calendar, it's our language. In that sense, the non-Jew who lives in Israel, it's 20% of the population, they have to know when Sukkot is just the same way as a Jew in America has to know when Christmas is, because that's the routine that they have to adapt to. It's our natural rhythm. It's the Jewish rhythm. So in that sense, it's a Jewish society. Right?
So is that the element that you're saying is more important than democracy?
So what I'm saying is that I want the Jewish state to be democratic, right? But to me, it's more important that there's a place in the world that, we'll use Robert Frost's definition of a home, the place where when you have to go there, they have to take you in. It's more important to me that there's such a place like that in the world than what its government looks like, right? That's, I think that, I don't know if, let's take a step back. Me personally, I don't know if I would want to live in a non-democratic state. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's, if it's a question of me personally, I don't know what I would choose. If it's a question of there needs to be a place in the world for the Jews, is it important that that place is democratic? It's important, but it's more important that such a place exists. Mm-hmm. I guess that's...
Meaning, when you're thinking, I guess the point of the question is that often many of the issues that Israel's dealing with, and I think there are always such different interpretations, whether it's judicial reform or whether it's something else that's in the political sphere, there's this tension between those two identity markers of Israel being the Jewish state and being the democratic state. It seems like, I'm a little bit confused with your answers. It seems like in some...
So am I. So let's walk it back.
Meaning, it seems like to some effect, or to some degree, you understand the idea of Judaism in Israel to be more of the cultural fabric, in the sense that they're, what the language is, how the calendar works, and so on. But then there also seems to be an identity for the state of Israel being a state for Jewish safety. But I guess when you are thinking about what the Jewish identity and the democratic identity are, how do you define, what do those two things mean to you?
So it's interesting. My gut reaction is Jewish is more important, and now I'm like trying to think, like, why was that my gut reaction? Like,
well, I guess what do you mean when your gut reaction is saying like what is, like, take away the word Jewish, and like the definition of what you're saying is what is more important?
I guess I'm thinking like if it had to be like, let's say one or the other, right? Israel could stop being Jewish or it could stop being democratic. I would say let it stop being democratic. Mm-hmm. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Israel's democracy is funny. I don't think that a country of Jews could be undemocratic on a certain level, because Israeli democracy is kind of like the democracy of the shuk. Everybody's yelling at each other, and at the end, like, you agree on a price, right? It's like it's not democracy of...
It's a little more chaotic.
It's chaotic, and it's more like we're just all handling, right? And a lot of it is just a show. And I don't think that can be taken away. Meaning, democracy is ultimately is an agreement that we're going to settle things through dialogue and the vote and, and governance rather than through force. That's essentially what it is. It's like saying that, like, okay, the guns are off the table. If we have disagreements, this is how we resolve our disagreements. We just resolve our disagreements in ways that are nonviolent.
Like a Beit Midrash.
Maybe like a Beit Midrash. But I'm saying, but the point is that it's no violence.
So on that note, I guess as a follow-up to the question is, should Israel treat its Jewish and non-Jewish citizens the same?
I think that, so again, I think it would depend on how you define that, right?
How do you define it?
Okay, so when it comes to civil rights, I think everything has to be equal, right? And this is, it's in Israel's Declaration of Independence. Now, you might say, okay, does that have any halachic weight? And I would argue that it probably does. Why? The state of Israel was accepted by the United Nations. It was recognized by other countries. I'm trying to do this fast, right? It's recognized by other countries. It was recognized by other states on the premise that it is going to be a democracy, a state of all of its citizens, where everybody would have equal rights, irrespective of, race, creed, color, religion, all those nice things. Now, if Israel made that promise, even if other people broke the promise, and even if it didn't really mean it, and even if it's against halacha, it doesn't matter. Where do we get that from? From the story of the Givonim in Sefer Yehoshua, right? The story of the Givonim is that there was this tribe that lived here in Eretz Israel. They duped Yehoshua. They made pretend that they were, some, refugee tribe, and they made a deal. They made a treaty with Yehoshua, and then they found out that that they were faking the whole thing, that they were liars, and they just they just weaseled their way into staying in Eretz Israel in the time of Yehoshua. But it was like, but you made a promise, so you have to keep it, even though it's going against what the Torah wants us to do, and even though they duped us, right? Meaning they duped us into a deal under false pretenses.
Do you think that there's halachic weight in the actions of the state of Israel?
Okay, there are 613 mitzvos, right? Some of those mitzvos are mitzvos that the individual has to perform. Some of those mitzvos are mitzvos that it's on the community to perform. For example, one example would be shoftim v'shodrim titin lecha b'chol sha'arecha. Som tasim alecha melech. Right? These are mitzvos that devolve upon the entire tzibur. Right? Those are a little bit pie in the sky, but let's take something that's very relevant today. Something like pidyon shavuyim. Okay, where the state of Israel, redeeming captives. The state of Israel, on behalf of its citizens, engages in efforts to redeem captives. Is that saying that the state of Israel collectively, on behalf of all Jews everywhere, is performing a mitzvah? I think the answer would be yes. Right? So in that sense, I think that there is halachic weight to the actions of a state because, or milchemes mitzvah, right? The mitzvah to defend Jews from enemies. That's a mitzvah that it's not an individual. What can an individual do? I'm an individual. I'm not an army. Collectively, we have a mitzvah to defend ourselves.
So does this answer, in some sense, your earlier question about what a Jewish state means?
It doesn't. Meaning, it doesn't mean that everything that a state does has halachic weight. And I don't believe that everything that the state does has halachic weight, right? And sometimes it might have halachic weight, but that doesn't mean it has a halachically meaningful weight. For example, economic laws, right? Laws regarding buying and selling, or laws regarding all of those things. It might have halachic weight in the sense that dina de malchuta dina, but that means that it has the same halachic weight as the laws in America, or the laws in English, the laws that govern commerce, right? Which in some ways, in some instances, in many instances, overrides the Torah's economic rules, right? I'm not talking about Torah and mitzvahs. I'm not talking about I'm not talking about Isser v'Heter. I'm talking about, right, if the secular court, or if in Israel or anywhere else says Ruvain owes Shimon money, then according to halacha, Ruvain owes Shimon money, right? As long as it's part of this, as long as it's a commercial, it's a purely commercial decision.
Yeah. It's kind of a good segue to the next question I was going to ask, which is Israel be a religious state?
But I don't even know what that means, right?
Well, no, let's take as an example, like I think the vision of whether it's like.
Well, this was my earlier podcast interview.
I know. I was going to say this is like good for the listeners. They should go to the original 1840, but separate podcast. Like with Herzog or Rav Goren or some visions of Rav Kook or so on. I'm curious, like what it would mean for you for Israel to be a religious state. Like when I asked that question, what's coming up for you, and B is like, is that actually the ideal? Should there in fact be a religious state?
Okay, first of all, the ideal clearly is a religious state, because that's the Torah ideal is a religious state. I'm going to start with a Gemara. I don't think I mentioned this Gemara in this interview.
The bonus.
Okay, there's a Gemara in, I think, Sanhedrin, Tav Chavav Chav Zayin, page 26, 27. It says that 40 years before the destruction of the Second Temple, so we're talking about the year 30 of the Common Era, or thereabouts, the Sanhedrin, the high court of the Jews, voluntarily went into exile. It says, Misharabu harotzchim, right? Once the murderers proliferated. There were a lot of murderers. So Rashi explains, what does that mean? It says there were so many, so they went into exile. They moved out of their office in the Beit HaMikdash on Har HaBayit. And by doing that, no courts could then try capital cases, meaning there were courts all over the country, and the halacha is that it's only permissible for any court to try a capital case and put somebody to death if there's that Supreme Court sitting in the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. When the Sanhedrin stepped out voluntarily and went into a storefront in Jerusalem, no courts from then on could judge capital cases, dinei nefashot. And Rashi says because there were too many murders. So I think about that in a couple of ways. One of the ways that I think about that is that, first of all, when a court puts someone to death, right, it should be shocking. And that comes out from the Mishnah in Makot. One says a court that kills more than once every 7 years is considered like a killing court. Another one says, there's another opinion there that even if it's once in 70 years, it's a murderous court. It's like, it's really got to be shocking. Right? So I think part of what's going on here, it's not just that the caseload was overwhelming the dockets, right? Like they just couldn't handle it, and so therefore, okay, just let the murderers go, let the murderers run rampant. I don't think that's the only thing that's going on. I think that part of what's going on is that, okay, the Sanhedrin, which is the representative of Torah, which is the representative of, this is, it goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu, who was convened the first Sanhedrin. It functions when the ideal Torah law can be perceived in a particular way, right? If a court is putting somebody, let's say, stoning somebody to death that breaks Shabbos, okay. If you're in a society where everybody keeps Shabbos and it's a really, and again, in order to be put to death for breaking Shabbos, you have to do it in a very wanton way, in a very open way, and everybody keeps Shabbos, right? The idea of like, oh yeah, today we should just, put 80% of 90% of the Jewish, it's insane, right? Nobody thinks in those terms because not just because we don't have the power to do it, and not just because we don't have the manpower, we don't have enough judges to sit on courts to put every Shabbos desecrator to death. That's not what it's about at all. The point is that it wouldn't mean anything. It would just be murder. It would just be killing people, right? It wouldn't it wouldn't have any kind of deterrent effect. It wouldn't improve society in any way.
And
therefore, the Sanhedrin voluntarily stepped off of Har HaBayit and said, we can't judge these cases anymore, because if we do judge these cases, it would have no effect. We would just be putting people to death for no reason. So we will no longer judge these cases, and we will no longer try capital cases, because it just wouldn't mean anything. Okay, so I think, to me, that's a paradigm of how a halachic state might work. Meaning, whoever is governing a halachic state, and again, this is like, I don't think this has anything to do with the state we live in now, right? I would hope that there's a sense that, like, all right, we have to know what we can control. We have to know what we can't control. We have to know where the people are. I would hope that a Sanhedrin doesn't come and say, all right, from now on, Ashkenazim can eat kitniot. From now on, right, here's the nusach, the correct nusach of tefillah, and everybody has to daven this way. No, I don't want that. I want nusach Sfard should continue to daven nusach Sfard, and the Yemenites and the Moroccans and the Iranians and the Hungarians and the Germans and the Litvaks, they'll all continue to daven as they were davening. Sometimes, minhagim amalgamate, sometimes they don't. I don't think we need to force, I don't want to impose changes like that. I wouldn't want a Sanhedrin that comes along and says, right, well, Ashkenazim do things this way,
but does the fact that you don't want it mean that's not necessarily what should be?
No, so I think that I would hope that the Sanhedrin would realize, like, that's not necessary, right? We don't need uniformity on that. Right? It's not like there's going to be certain issues that we really that really do require a public consensus.
And you think that if Israel were a religious state, then that would be a cost to it?
Well, I would hope that they would let things be, right? If Israel were a religious state. It's not. If Israel were a religious state, I would hope that didn't mean that we're enforcing what's going on in people's houses, right? That there's like a certain that I wouldn't want it to be a religious police state. I wouldn't want it to be a religious state, meaning I just don't think we're there. But if I were in a religious state, I would hope that it would be that the religious leaders would recognize that not everything has to be imposed. It's okay to let people live their lives as long as they're not doing anything flagrant. But again, this is all like way too theoretical. I mean, I don't even like thinking about the state of Israel in those terms, because it just encourages the people that think that this is just around the corner, and it's not.
We won't make you do it any longer. Now that Israel already exists, what's the purpose of Zionism?
Oh gosh, I don't even know what Zionism means anymore.
Why?
It meant so many things over the last 125 years.
Give me a couple.
Well, at one point, it referred to a specific movement, right? With members, right? That movement and its membership, they ended up becoming the government here. They ended up founding the state. And so anybody that wants to live in the state sort of has to play ball with them, but that doesn't mean it's just because they're the government, right? There were plenty of non-Zionist Karedi groups that were encouraging Aliyah, groups that were founding settlements here in Israel. I'm saying, like, in the pre-state era, who were encouraging people to move here, who were complaining that the Zionists were taking all the certificates for Aliyah. Even things like Aguda, right? Organizations like Aguda, they weren't, they never, first of all, they never became Zionist. To this day, they wouldn't call themselves Zionists. They don't call themselves Zionist, but they've cooperated to various degrees with the Zionist movement over the course of the last 100 years, right? And this is like the thing that's like, yeah, all these rabbis were anti-Zionist. And it's like, okay, you want to be anti-Zionist? Great. Like I say, Jews today is like, I'm not Zionist. I don't want to be Zionist. Be an anti-Zionist like the Kloisenberger Rebbe, okay? Be an anti-Zionist like the Kloisenberger Rebbe. Build a hospital in Netanyahus. Bring an entire community to live in Eretz Yisrael and be anti-Zionist. Be anti-Zionist like that, right? It's
So do you think that Zionism has a purpose today? Or a function?
I think
not descriptively, but prescriptively.
Meaning, today I think Zionist basically means either you live in Israel or you're pro-Israel. I think that's like just a different, it should be a different term. Zionism, if Zionism means that I believe that the Jewish people have a right to self-determination, I think this is like the bottom line, baseline definition. I believe that the Jewish people have a right to self-determination within their ancient homeland. Doesn't mean that they have a right in their entire ancient homeland or that they should have their whole, we can share, we can play nice if we need to. It doesn't have to be that. It's not yes, it made common cause with colonial powers, it made common cause with the Ottomans, it made common cause with the Brits, but that doesn't mean that it was a colonial project in any sense other than, like the same way that they called, Jewish settlements in the southern Ukraine colonies, right? Whenever anybody set up a farming community, they called it a colony. It doesn't mean that it's,
linked to colonialism.
Part of it's linked to colonialism in that way, right? Or at least that the term colony had a broader semantic range than white people who don't belong here coming here to dispossess the locals, right? In that sense, I think that sorry, I lost the train of thought. Where were we?
We were speaking about the function of Zionism and about different views people have on it, and it not necessarily being meaningful. Or, personally, I think that like my next question was kind of going to be on the inverse. Do you think that opposing Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic?
I don't think that opposing Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic. I just think that if you would like draw a Venn diagram of like anti-Semites and anti-Zionists, there would be plenty of anti-Semites who are not anti-Zionist, but there would be very few anti-Zionists who are not anti-Semites. Meaning, like that Venn diagram, like I don't know how I would draw it exactly, but like,
should be on a whiteboard.
Yeah, there are just, there are not a lot of anti-Zionists who are not anti-Semites, right? It's like, I know a guy, it's like, exactly, you know a guy, right? They're not a lot, okay? Mm-hmm. And that's certainly once you leave the Jewish community. I feel like,
but you're saying, meaning, is the opposition to Zionism the vehicle through which they become anti-Semitic, or you're saying separately from that?
I think it's both. Meaning, first, I think that if you deny Jewish peoplehood, right? If you say something like, why should the Jewish people have a right to a state? Judaism is just a religion, where there are Jews, there have been Jews that believe that, but if you're not Jewish, you don't get to make that call. Meaning, we were Jews. In what is it, the Pittsburgh Platform in 1886, it actually says it. Like, this was the official position of the Reform community in the United States, was we consider Judaism to be no longer a nation, but only a religion. But it was a choice, right? Meaning, it's not saying historically we weren't a nation. It's like today, we are, right? And you had all this rhetoric in the time of emancipation. We are French or Germans or Hungarians of the Mosaic faith, right? We're Jews. We're allowed, if we want to make that choice, we can. And other Jews will might consider that a betrayal, and did consider that a betrayal, right? Of peoplehood, of that nationhood that we have, that goes beyond just, right, that goes beyond religion, right? In fact, there was a major thinker almost, 175 years ago who was not so well known today, Rabbi Akiva Yosef Schlesinger. He says that Jewish peoplehood, both chronologically and ideally, precedes the Jewish religion, right? He quotes the pasuk in Yonah. It's a famous song now. Ivri Anochi v'es Hashem Elokei Hashamayim ani yoreh. Right? First is Ivri Anochi, right? I'm a member of a tribe. I'm a Hebrew, right? And then you have the religious part. V'es Hashem Elokei Hashamayim ani yoreh. Right? That's the religious component. And I believe in God, right? And he says that we became a nation in Egypt. We got the Torah only afterwards, right? And so those things that we have, our collective identity, our Jewish identity, which we had in Egypt, that precedes the Torah and in some ways is more constitutive than the Torah. And he says that if you give that up, even if you keep the Torah, and he says this, if you give that up, if you give up the peoplehood aspect, even if you keep the Torah, it's, he doesn't say it's, I don't know if he says it's nothing. He doesn't have nice things to say about that. That's, so he's pushing back. He's pushing back on this sense of, on this idea that Judaism is just a religion. We can have that debate. The Jewish people, we can have that debate because it's us and it's an internal debate.
But from outsiders, it's
outsiders
very
for
hard
you to
avoid,
say,
a
like,
malicious-
if 80% of the Jewish people, 90% of the Jewish people votes with their feet, that we feel like, just imagine the following conversation. It's like, hey, are you Jewish? Like, yeah. It's like, do you believe in God? No. It's like, okay, I guess it's possible to be Jewish without being religious, right? I guess it's possible that Judaism isn't just a religion because there are people with no religious identity to speak of who still consider themselves Jewish, right? If the people are voting with their feet, if the Jewish people collectively are voting with their feet and saying, we belong to a certain people, right? And somebody from outside comes along and says, well, you're actually not a people, really, you're just, you're a religion, and in the last, 150 years, you made up that you have this peoplehood or that you have this nationhood, and therefore you decided that you're going to come and take somebody else's land. If that's how you think, then you are an anti-Semite because you're denying our experience of peoplehood, our self-perception as being a people and not just a religion.
If you were making the case for Israel, where would you begin?
I would begin, I don't know where I would begin, but I would go back pretty far. I would begin with the institution of the Hezdar. It goes back only like 400 or 500 years. But I think that's enough for these purposes.
What was the Hezdar?
Shluchah d'Rabbanan. These were these emissaries, the rabbinic emissaries that the communities in Eretz Yisrael, the four primary communities in those days were Tzfat, Tiberia, Yerushalayim, and Hebron. They would send these out. They would send out fundraisers, and they would go through all through the Jewish world, collecting money to support the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. Right? And you have, first of all, you have people like the Chida who were emissaries, and you have others, you had major Talmidei Chachamim who were emissaries, but you also have, they kept really good records, and you have, they have these notebooks where they visited hundreds of communities, and every little, everybody's giving a couple of pennies, right? This idea that this is something that just happened now, that this is something that just happened, that just happened in the last 150 years. No, the kinetic energy was released in the last 150 years, but the potential energy has been building up for centuries, maybe even millennia. I would open up the Siddur, right? And you would see just how much of our daily Shmona Esrei is centered on Eretz Yisrael. If you think about it, right? 6, 7 brachos in a row. The bracha of Kibbutz Galiot, right? The bracha of Hashiva Shofteinu Gevar Ishona, the bracha of Es Tzemach David, V'lirushalayim Ircha, Ritzei, Ritzei Hashem Elokeinu B'amcha Yisrael Uva'avodatam V'hashevet ha'avodah l'dver beitecha. It's like, what, 6 brachas, 1/3 of Shmona Esrei is centered on Eretz Yisrael? Oh, and yeah, it's a machlokas about the Birkat Hashanim, right? Birkat Hashanim may or may not be about Eretz Yisrael. Probably not. But the rest of them, Kibbutz Galuyot. I know the Satmar Rebbe has an opinion that it's not about Eretz Yisrael, that Kibbutz Galuyot is going to be somewhere else. Okay, aside from the Satmar Rebbe, it's Kibbutz Galuyot. The ingathering of exiles. We talk about that as happening here.
So that this concerns making the case for Israel. But I guess on another note, I'm curious: can questioning the actions of Israel's government and the army, even in the context of this war, be considered a valid form of love and patriotism?
I think, of course, most Israelis today are against what the government's doing now.
So, what do you think is the most legitimate criticism leveled against Israel?
Right now?
Sure.
Right now, I think that it's the optics of, meaning it's a black box. I don't know why they're running the war in the way that they are, but it sure looks like Netanyahu is doing what he can to stay in power. That's, there are things that have been going on. It's not just the failure of the war. I mean, it was on his watch. Yes, there were other people that made mistakes, and the mistakes had been building up, and there was a whole, what they call a conceptia, right? A whole way of thinking that sort of led to this moment, but it was on his watch, right? And it's been his watch for the last, 14 out of the last 15 years or something like that. Like, he's been on the watch, it's been on his watch for a while, except for that 1 year where he wasn't prime minister. What's going on with Qatar, stuff is, it's like, there's stuff that's going on that's really opaque. And that if, a healthy immune system would be fighting, and the immune system is not healthy. I think that call elections, if people reelect you, fine. It means that what you're doing, people want you to continue to do. But I don't understand how you can assume that just because, you were elected in 2022, it means that people are satisfied with what you're doing today. Because, frankly, you done messed up. And, and this survival mode is really like nobody wants to take blame for anything. Nobody wants to take responsibility for anything. I think it's toxic.
Should all Israelis serve in the army?
Meaning, should all able-bodied Israeli males serve in the army?
You can qualify it however you'd like. Meaning, among your requirements are able-bodied male.
Yes. I don't
Non-Jews
think,
as well as Jews?
well, put it this way. Ideally, non-Jews as well as Jews. But I get that it's hard to conscript somebody, to force somebody to fight against their family members. It really is, right? And we know this from our own Jewish experience, right? In World War I, in World War II, it was not Jew against Jew. It was, meaning the Jews were on one side and ultimately the winning side, but we all know that we paid a very, very, very high price before the war was won by the good guys, or in the case of Stalin, the less bad guys, or the slightly less bad guys, whatever. World War I, it was Jew against Jew. Like there were Jews on either side. They were either side of the war, and it created a lot of dilemmas. It created like there were Jews that wanted to not fight, that wanted to not serve, and there are shaylos and tshuvos about this. Can I not serve because I might have to kill another Jew because he's on the other side, right? And I get that, and I get that question, and I also get that if you conscript an Israeli, an Arab citizen of Israel into the Israeli army, the guy on the other side might be a cousin, right? Families did end up on different sides of the fence in 1948.
So let's
I
say
get that.
outside of Arabs, how do you view? I mean, you had touched a little bit on the question, or alluded to the
Yeah,
question of like the Haredi draft, which is has been in the news for a very very long time and a lot
very
more
long time.
recently. I guess I'm curious for that specifically. What do you think? Or I guess like let me ask: have you spoken to Haredi about why they don't with the draft, or those who have like actual authority in some sense and understanding of
Oh,
the community?
I have. I've had a few conversations. Mainly, I've had conversations with people that I can have conversations with. Um, I have Haredi family members. I did try to have. I had a conversation, lasted about an hour, towards the beginning of the war, and I did not come away. And I've also been to like several, I guess, town hall type meetings, and I've had other one-on-one interactions. As I said before, my feeling is one of frustration and exasperation and sometimes anger.
Was there ever a point when you had more sympathy, so to speak, for the Haredi
Oh, absolutely.
perspective? When was that?
Oh, for the Karedi perspective, I just didn't think, I never imagined that the stakes were so high. I never really thought that, I always thought that it was something of a cop out, meaning you look around. I spent 6 years in Hezdar yeshivas. I spent 3 years at Karedi Perspective. I spent 3 years in the Gush. I've seen a lot of Hezdar students, and it's possible. It's possible to be a soldier and a Talmud Chacham, right? My son's Rebbe is still going to Miluim. He's a guy in probably his early 40s, got a whole bunch of kids. He's a Rebbe in yeshiva, a high level, he's a first year Rebbe in yeshiva. He's teaching 19-year-olds, right? He's teaching, he's teaching them Shev Shmaitza, right? And he's spending a lot of time in the army because, he that's how he came up and that's how he learned. And so I just think that the whole, you can't really become a Talmud
Wasn't it
Chacham.
also concerned about religious attrition? I think is the correct word.
They talk about a religious attrition. It's true. And I'm not going to say that there's no religious attrition in the,
And you can go off the derech for those who
yeah,
aren't familiar.
yeah. So look, I'm gonna draw a little bit from my experience as a JLIC rabbi, even though it was almost 20 years ago, 2004 to 2000, more than 20 years ago, 2004 to 2006, right? So that's another one of the bugaboos, right? Oh, secular university, you go and you're going to become, you're going to go off the derech. From my experience, the students who stopped being religious, who stopped, being observant, it didn't happen gradually over 4 years. It happened by like Hanukkah of their first semester on campus. Sometimes the yarmulke was off, or the skirt was off by the end of by the end of by the end of orientation. Right? It was not a drawn out process. Meaning, you educate people to become adults, right? Now you wanna handle about at what point is someone an adult, old enough to make their own decisions, set enough to be, so that they'll be stable and won't be tempted by everything that's going on. You want to say it's 18, 19, 20, 21, fine. Let's have that conversation. The idea that you're going to sit until you're, 30 years old and have 4 kids, and then maybe you'll go out and either join the workforce or join the army for a 6-month service, like that's not in the realm of possibility. There's a Gemara, and I think this is a really important Gemara for today, okay? The Gemara says that if somebody walks, I'm trying to remember this by heart, if somebody walks past a place where, it's just where women were doing laundry, if a man walks past a place where women are doing laundry in the river, and the presumption is that they would be, they would be in a state of immodesty, and so a man has to avoid walking there, and if he walks there, he's considered a Russia. And the Gemara asks, but what if there's no other way? Meaning, leka darka achrita. So I think if there's no other way, then he's what's called anus, right? He had no choice. He had to walk that way. You do what you can. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will help you out, and you'll withstand the temptation, hopefully, right? If there's another way around, right? If there's another way to go, and you go the way that there's an immodesty, then you're considered a Russia. You're considered wicked. So maybe you could argue that until recently there was another way around. Right? It wasn't necessary, and there were other things you could do. Today, I think that there's no other way. We can't continue like this. There's no other way. So yeah, it means taking spiritual risks. It means that you're going to have to walk that path where there are going to be temptations on that path. But the Gemara says, if there's no other path, that's the path that you have to take.
Do you think the state of Israel is part of the final redemption?
I would say, okay. The state of Israel is part of a redemption. I think that I can say that with a great deal of confidence. Okay? Because if you look at how the word redemption is used in Tanakh, I'm actually cribbing from Rav Yoel ben Nun because I'm editing his Haggadah, and he has a whole piece on this. And I'm convinced.
We got a thief.
Well, you're getting it. Right? We say it in davening every day. We quote a pasuk, Ki fada Hashem et Yaakov, God, he ransomed Yaakov, uge'alo, and redeemed him, miyad, from the clutches, from the hands, chazak mimenu, of somebody who was stronger than him. Right? What's geula? We are released from that kind of bondage. We are released from being under the thumb of someone stronger than us. Okay? Throughout, in several places, a number of places in Tanakh, the word geula comes up specifically in context of kibbutz galuyot, right? The ingathering of exiles back to the Jews coming back to Eretz Israel. Since the founding of the state, millions of Jews have made Aliyah from dozens and dozens of countries. So to look at this and say, this is not a geula, I think that that's just denying the straight facts on the ground. This is it. This is what geula means. The Jews coming back here, kayonim el aruotehem, like doves to their dovecoats. That's geula. That's a geula. Is it the final geula? I don't know. I'm not a prophet.
Is Messianism helpful or harmful to Israel?
Messianism is one of those words that it gets a really bad It gets a really bum rap, okay? What does Messianism mean? Fundamentally, Messianism means that the world is perfectible, that history can have an end point, that the world can get to a point where we made it. We finished all the levels. We knocked out we killed all the beasts on the way up, and we won. Like we got there, right? Messianism means that the world is ultimately the world is perfectible. We can get there. I think that losing that belief, I think that believing that the world is not perfectible is far more dangerous than believing that the world is perfectible. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I think that that Messianism is crucial. We should all be messianic.
And in a colloquial sense?
Now, in the colloquial sense, it's meant as though, it's like, well, I have specific knowledge about how this world perfection is going to unfold, because my guy is going to be the guy that brings the world to that, or because I know exactly what I have to do in order to make it happen, or because I know that this is going to happen, or I know that that can't happen. Those are things that I think can be dangerous, can be very dangerous. Once somebody feels like they have God's playbook, almost, the ends justify almost any means. Okay? And I think that that's really dangerous. I think that it's, we can believe that the world is perfectible. The basic recipe that we have for making the world better is ultimately Torah and mitzvos, right? The Torah is the blueprint for that. And to go outside the bounds of the Torah in our pursuit of this final redemption, I think that that's something that's deeply problematic and really dangerous.
Do you think peace between Israelis and Palestinians will happen within your lifetime?
I don't.
You don't think so?
I don't. I think it's possible, but I think that, look.
My dad quipped that I should ask as a follow-up, how about in my lifetime?
Yeah, I think it's more possible in your lifetime. I think it's more possible in your lifetime. I'm already hitting, I guess it depends on,
Well, what gives you doubt that there wouldn't be peace?
Every Palestinian alive today hates us. I'm not saying that they all want to kill us. I don't think that's true. I think that if you're a Palestinian and you've seen what Israel has done to Palestinians over the last year and a half, we can talk amongst ourselves, justified, not justified, whatever. If you're a Palestinian, you're not going to say like, well, yeah, it's true. There, however many tens of thousands dead, but I kind of understand where Israel's coming from, because we did do that whole 9/11, that whole 10/7 thing, with the October 7th thing. That's not going to be their perspective. Their perspective is they're the ones shooting bombs at us. They're our enemy. I hate them, right? So I really don't think that there's a Palestinian alive today that doesn't hate Israel and hate us as citizens of Israel. And if there's gonna be peace, there has to be it has to be a completely different generation, a generation that didn't experience this, a generation that grew up in relative peace and prosperity, and that can look across the fence and see in Israel somebody that, oh yeah, it's possible that maybe we'll get along, that maybe we can get along with them. I don't think that's not there now. I'm not, without assigning blame, without saying like, oh, we started, they started, without even getting into that. I think it's going to take a long time for there to be a Palestinian generation that doesn't hate us.
Where do you identify on Israel's political, and if you're going to love this question, it's all about identity, on Israel's political and religious spectrum? And do you have any friends on the quote-unquote other side?
Like everybody else, I identify as a centrist.
Really?
Yeah. No, I'm saying like, I tend to think that, I think that most people think that their views represent some kind of center. They're,
Do you think your views represent the center?
of course.
Center on the right or center on the left?
No, I think that,
A center between the right and left.
yeah, I mean, listen, I have voted for centrist parties in the last few elections, but like, I think that that's part of the self-perception is that, okay, those guys have some good points and those guys have some good points. And, it's hard to, like, there are so many issues and you can fall, to the, on one side on one issue and another side on another issue.
And religiously?
That's not a political question.
No, but where do you identify religiously and politically?
So, okay, so here's a really crucial distinction when it comes to religion. My religious identity is Jewish. My religious affiliation, well, I belong to a synagogue. So here's the thing. I don't even think that there's such a thing as an Orthodox Jew or a Reform Jew or a conservative Jew or whatever. I think that there are Reform and conservative and Orthodox institutions, and there are Jews who affiliate with those institutions, okay? Meaning, because we're all different. We're all doing different things. And like, just because I daven in an Orthodox shul doesn't mean that I,
No, I mean, doesn't
certain...
it usually refer to a certain, within each denomination, general ideology or framework where there's people identify with, and therefore they'd say, okay, fine, the same way you'd be like, I'm a Democratic Jew, I'm a Republican Jew.
I think that's actually backwards. Meaning, I think that,
and like it may be backwards, but it still is reality.
I think that even in reality, that it's a bunch of Jews get together, decide that they're going to make a shul, they're going to make a community, they're going to make a place to daven together, right? They're going to do what they feel comfortable with, and then they're going to look around and say, which umbrella organization does it make more sense for us to affiliate with?
So if someone said Elli Fischer is an Orthodox Jew, it's like, no, that's incorrect.
I'm not going to say that because I know how people use the term, right? And because I'm a rabbi, it's like, well, where did I get smicha from, right? I'm an Orthodox rabbi, right? I'm going to be like a mashgiach on a cruise soon, right? I was like, I don't want people to be like, is this kosher? I was like, well, I don't, my identity is this, that, and the other. It's like, no, I'm serious about halacha, okay? So in that sense, like, yes, to use the colloquial term, of course, Orthodox.
Religious Zionist?
Religious Zionist, again, there are people that would say that I'm not.
Would you say you are? Like, am I incorrect
Again,
if I say
I think...
Like, if I said Elli Fischer is a religious Zionist Jew, am I wrong? Okay.
I would say that it's too complicated, but I can't stand when people do that. So okay. I wouldn't say anything.
Okay, fine.
Like, I don't like it when people are like, oh, I'm too complex for your little boxes. Like, so like, fine. If that's what you want to label me, shine.
No, I was just asking.
Good, right? But that's the thing. I let other people do the labeling.
Okay.
Somebody wants to call me an Orthodox Jew, an Orthodox rabbi, a religious Zionist, whatever. It happens to be the institutions that I affiliate with, or that my family affiliates with. That's where it tends to be, right? I only have a membership in one shul, and it's,
Which shul?
Kihilat Sha'arei Yonah Menachem in Buchman, Modi'in.
It's a good shout out for them.
Yeah, no, several members of our shul have been interviewed on 1840 in the past. Oh, you had the Samters not long ago.
Oh yeah.
They were
Anyone
great.
else?
They were great. Or the ones. My favorite part of the Samters podcast was that David was, said something like, "You guys could be like sitting back in the five towns, sitting on Central Avenue, sipping your lattes, and instead, you're in Israel and you have a kid fighting in Gaza. You have kids fighting in Gaza." And like, I was thinking it when David said that, and then Bela actually like verbalized exactly what I was thinking. It's like, we can be sitting in Modi'in at our cafes, sipping our lattes, and we still have kids fighting in Gaza, right? Like that's where we are. That's what it is.
So last question, not necessarily about identity, but about something longer lasting. Do you have more hope or fear for Israel and the Jewish people?
Right now, fear. Mm-hmm. At this moment, fear.
you say more about that?
Let's get back to what we talked about a little bit at the beginning, that there's a grace period. And I don't know how long that grace period is going to last. I'm not my fear is that this amazing and wonderful and grand experiment that's been going on for 77 years called the State of Israel, I think it's much more part of our consciousness now, but I always had it in the back of my mind, like, what's the guarantee that it's gonna last forever? I don't know. Who knows? It's very hard to, I mean, it's been 5 minutes in historical terms, right? There are states that lasted much, much longer and are no longer. But within the fear, there's hope, meaning I think that even if that, like, we're not going away. We're going to be around. We're going to be around forever. The Jewish people are never going to die out. And so does that mean that after the next debacle, after the next Beitar, it's going to be another 2,000 years before we get the opportunity to try this all again? I don't know. That's the fear. But the hope is that at the end of all that, it's cyclical. We'll come back. We'll get back here someday.